I'm one of those frustrated Americans, like many, who look at Washington and see the corruption and see the lack of regular order and see CRs being passed left and right. And my question for you is, how do we get that changed? How do we stop our CR process from happening again and again and again?
And thanks for asking about that. This has been one of my greatest concerns during the 7.5 years that I've been fortunate to represent Utah in the United States Senate. For those of you who are not familiar with what he's describing, when he refers to a CR, he's describing a spending bill called a continuing resolution. Over the last few years, Congress has relied overwhelmingly on a combination of continuing resolutions. Think of those as basically a reset button that Congress pushes when it wants to just keep current spending levels throughout the federal government current. They just want to extend that into the next fiscal year. So Congress has operated on the basis of back-to-back continuing resolutions and in some instances omnibus spending packages. An omnibus spending package is a spending bill that incorporates basically everything the federal government does into one big bill. Under the Budget Act of 1974, Congress is supposed to pass a dozen or so appropriations bills, at least 12 bills, each dealing with a different aspect of the federal government. One of those bills, for instance, deals with the Department of Defense. Another one deals with veterans benefits and military construction. Yet another one deals with the Department of Justice, and another one deals with things like our national parks. We're supposed to pass a dozen different bills, each funding a different aspect of the federal government. Instead, Congress has been lumping all those into one and considering it at once. That's not a categorically bad approach. I think it would be better if passed a dozen bills, but if we want to lump them all into one bill, I suppose that could be fine as long as the American people are given adequate opportunity to read and understand what's in there, and their elected senators and representatives are given a chance to amend anything that might be wrong with that package. What has instead happened for years on end, to my great frustration and dismay, has been that a small handful of leaders in Congress, and I mean really small, as in you could count them arguably on one hand, definitely on two hands, gets together in a backroom situation and they negotiate a single bill and they wait to release that bill that funds the entire government until the last possible moment. For example, with our last omnibus spending bill passed just a few weeks ago, we received on a Wednesday night, this after months of me and several of my colleagues asking Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell week after week when we were going to get to see a spending bill, when we'd have the opportunity to vote on it, to amend it. After many months of asking these questions week after week, on a Wednesday evening, we received a 2,232-page spending bill at 8:35 p.m. on a Wednesday. Before lunch the following day, the House of Representatives had passed that bill. And in the middle of the night, the following night, the Senate passed that bill against my objecting vote. This is wrong. This is not only something that could lead to corruption, this is corruption itself. It's got to stop. The way it stops is for members of Congress to stop voting for them. Think of it this way. Every single time one of these bills gets passed that way, this small handful of legislative leaders, you might refer to it as the law firm of Ryan, Pelosi, McConnell, and Schumer, gets more powerful. I'm not saying they necessarily intend at the outset to do harm, but I'm saying that when they do it this way, it works for them, and when it works for them, they become more powerful. The American people, meanwhile, become less powerful as their elected senators and representatives are cut out of the process and are told, look, you can vote for this bill, which we encourage you to do, or you can vote against it, but if you vote against it and it fails, you'll be blamed for a government shutdown. This is wrong. This is legislative malpractice. It runs contrary to everything we believe about representative government in America. And so I've maintained for a long time they'll continue to do this, not because they're bad people, but because it works for them. And they become more powerful every time they do it. They'll continue to do it until it no longer works. It will no longer work when they can't get the votes. That's why I've been encouraging my fellow Utahns in Utah's congressional delegation to vote against it. A few months ago, when we had a continuing resolution on the table, I was thrilled when Representative John Curtis voted against the continuing resolution. At the time, he and I believe, were the only members of Utah's congressional delegation to vote against that bill. A few weeks later, when the omnibus spending bill came up, Representative Curtis joined me in voting against it, and so did all of the other members of Utah's House delegation. And so it was me and our 4 representatives in the House of Representatives voting against it. I will continue to encourage my current colleague and whoever is elected in his place, as well as our counterparts in the House of Representatives, to vote against any and every spending bill that is brought forward at the last possible minute before a government shutdown, with no opportunity for debate, discussion, or amendment. I will continue to encourage them to vote against it. I will also continue to encourage President Trump to veto any such legislation. I encouraged the president to veto this bill after it was passed a few weeks ago. And when he decided to sign it anyway, I had multiple conversations with him after that, in which I told him, you can't allow this to happen again. You've got to threaten and be ready to exercise a veto if they do this again. That's why I was thrilled when he gave a speech shortly after he signed the bill. I wasn't thrilled that he signed it, but I was thrilled that he said, never again. I'm never doing one of these again. By these, I take him to mean these bills that are brought forward at the last possible minute with no opportunity for amendment, debate, discussion. So look, this will continue until it no longer works. It won't work anymore when people vote against it. So please continue to put pressure on me, on the other members of Utah's congressional delegation to vote no on these bills.